Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for this special webinar brought to you by the Open University Business School as part of Learning at Work Week. My name's Terry O'Sullivan, and I'm the MOOCs Programme Director for the Faculty of Business and Law at the Open University Business School. I'm delighted to be hosting today's session, and I'm equally delighted to be joined by Dr. Hilary Collins, who is the Regional Manager and Senior Lecturer in Management at the Open University Business School.
Welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy the webinar.
I'm sure everybody will, Hilary. Thank you. Over the next 45 minutes, we want to share with you some of our perspectives and thoughts on communications, particularly in the 21st century. And we hope that you'll find this interesting and thought-provoking. The webinar that we're hosting today forms part of a wider set of activity taking place during Learning at Work Week, which has been running all through this week. This initiative, which we're proud to be involved in, is coordinated by the Campaign for Learning and is an annual opportunity to celebrate and promote the benefits of workplace learning. All sorts of organisations are running activities during the week, so thank you for taking the time to join us here in this forum. You'll be able to interact with us during this webinar in a number of ways. You'll see on your screen a chat panel, and we invite you to share your questions there. We'll try and answer as many of those as we can. You'll also have the chance to participate in our polls, and we'll be handing over to our technical manager, Andrew, to launch those during the course of the next 45 minutes. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and available online after this session. So if you have any colleagues who would like to have taken part but can't, you can share this with them. Right, over to our first video now, where Hilary will talk about the continuing distribution of organisations.
Organisations are becoming more organisationally distributed. With central offices, work is less concentrated in individual dedicated workspaces as collaborative activities gain greater significance. More broadly, dispersion is driven by outsourcing of functions to service providers, the relocation of work to lower cost locations, the push of responsibilities to lower organisational levels, and the ever-present imperative on lower non-direct costs. It's no secret that companies are shrinking their own staffs, workers employed directly by the organisation. More non-core functions such as IT, human resources, accounting, purchasing and corporate real estate are being outsourced. And remaining functions are continuing to be distributed nationally and globally, primarily driven by lower labour costs in other regions, proximity to internal or external customers, and access to talents and skills not available locally. As a result, organisations increasingly represent a complex web of employees, suppliers and customers, both co-located and dispersed around the world. Organisations have discovered that they can cut huge amounts of indirect costs by limiting travel. About £100 million annual expense for a £10 billion company, and reducing square footage dedicated to the individual worker. They are replacing expensive face-to-face meetings with remote technologies and combining centralised workplaces with alternative workplace programs. Despite their fears, many managers have found that workers are able to remain productive, thus encouraging further reduction of travel budgets and conversion of more static, individually oriented space to collaboration work settings. However, you can't simply transfer existing ways of working and communicating into newly distributed organisations and be successful. You have to adopt new management policies, work behaviours, collaborative technologies, and importantly, different ways of communication. This will all result in more remote workers, and this comes with a communication challenge of keeping workers engaged and connected. How can we make sure that the employee in their fuzzy bunny slippers and pyjamas is still engaged with his or her co-workers and the company? Indeed, this may be a growing concern as more workers spend part of their time away from the office but need to communicate with the office and other distributed workers. This is a problem from the organisation's perspective, but it's also a problem from the employees as well. People identify themselves by their work and their work groups and still want to engage with others, to meet and catch up on each other's lives and families. The question is how and where they will do this as more workers work remotely and they rarely meet each other face to face. 30% of the technology company's employees are now mobile workers, and many rarely return to the office once they've been untethered. As more and more people work away from that company's central office, there are fewer and fewer colleagues left to visit. In response, companies are creating magnet spaces to entice employees, formal and informal collaboration areas, hoteling workstations and destination resource centres with copiers, suppliers, etc. To be successful, the initiative will need to link in the physical design solution with technological and establish communication practices that are efficient and effective. As many workers become tightly connected to globally dispersed work teams where there is no convenient place to meet other team members, they will have to start relying more on technologies such as video conferencing and social media, or plan occasional face-to-face meetings to keep in touch with others. However, it remains to be seen whether these tools will be sufficient to engender the social trust necessary for effective team collaboration. As workers, we are becoming more geographically dispersed, and communication practices, the policies, attitudes and behaviours we use to do work have to shift. You can't necessarily assume that the same communication practices in a co-located workplace work as well for a distributed group. As groups become more distributed, formality in communication practice is essentially necessary, mainly because it's no longer possible to communicate more casually or informally. In addition, even though good work practices for working with remote workers are pretty much the same for co-located workers, they become essential for more remote workers. In other words, you may be able to get away with poor practices when you're all in the one location, but you must establish good communication practice if your group is distributed.
Great, thanks very much for that. Now, let's have a look at poll 1. You'll be asked to vote on these in a moment, so let me just read out the questions. What are the issues in communication if you're a remote worker? Is it A, isolation, B, efficiency, C, access to resources, D, effective communication with co-workers, and E, other? So can you make your selection for those 5, please? What are the issues, do you think, in communication if you're a remote worker? Which is the most important from your point of view? Is it A, isolation, B, efficiency, C, access to resources, D, effective communication with co-workers, or E, other? Great. Well, while our delegates are pondering the answers to those questions, Hilary, I wonder if you could just expand on the point you made in that video about the way you can't transfer existing ways of working and communicating into distributed organisations.
Yes, Terry, of course, I'd love to. One of the main issues, of course, is that when we're in a face-to-face organisation, we have a lot of conversations over coffee, in the corridor to make decisions, and that kind of communication doesn't take place in the distributed organisation. The result of that, in order to confirm communication, we need to adapt to more formal processes of communication. Otherwise, we'll not be able to check and see if communication has taken place. And so we could say it's one of the downsides, actually, of having a distribution of organisation, that we lose that informality between colleagues.
Oh, I guess that must have a number of perhaps unforeseen side effects, particularly in the way that we see ourselves. Because, after all, it's the social interaction very often that promotes your idea of who you are, because you're getting that reflected back to you from other people. So if you're working largely on your own, how do modern patterns of communication tend to play to that?
Well, it is actually quite a new facet of research in the area of identity. There have been a lot of studies on workplace identity and the processes we go through in our working life to confirm our own identity within the organisation. And now the research lens has turned to that area because we do not have the signs and symbols within our workplace and within our environment that confirm our identity, who we are within that organisation. So there's quite a lot of worry and concern about that and what the results of that are going to be. I mean, it may, of course, be very positive. It would be interesting to see what our delegates think of that. But, at the moment, the focus has been on perhaps, well, to some extent, the negative aspects of that.
Right. I can see that we've got the results of the first poll through now. Hilary, any surprises there for you?
I'm just trying to check and see what they are, actually. So let's so scrolling up. So isolation is isolation 41.3%. Yes, certainly the people that I've been speaking to recently who have perhaps been asked to work from home or as opposed to working in the office, that does seem to be predominant. I think the key question here as well is the difference between those who have chosen that as an option versus those who it's actually been forced upon them. So it would be interesting to unpick that in terms of isolation, whether that comes really if you're choosing to work from home as opposed to actually being forced into that situation for changes.
I can see, I don't know whether our delegates, sorry to talk across you, Hilary, I can see the results. Actually, the other big scoring result there was 37% for effective communication with co-workers, which is very closely related to isolation, I guess. Efficiency and access to resources scored a lot less low in terms of people's opinion. Efficiency was 9.8%, so only about 1 in 10 delegates think that's the biggest issue, which perhaps says much for the emotional intelligence of the people tuning in. And the other is access to resources, again, 7.6%. And there was an other of 4.3%. I've just noticed the point's been made by a couple of people that clearly more than one of these factors will come into play. But I guess what we're looking for in these polls is the one that strikes our delegates as the most important.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's very true, and probably the one on effective communication with co-workers does perhaps add a little bit weight to the concern about the loss of informal communication within the organisation and the need perhaps then to formalise our communication by one way or another. Great.
Well, interesting enough, we're going to move now to the next video, which is about how technology is actually enabling us to get over some of these problems of isolation, particularly with the informed use of social media to help us collaborate more effectively. So I wonder if we could have the next video, please, Andrew.
Using technological tools for communication, storing and managing shared data for distributed work is not new. What is new is the extension of these capabilities to cheaper and more ubiquitous devices. To access work materials and interact with colleagues on a 24/7 basis, all we need is a smartphone or any other wired device that reaches the internet, and these tools are being consolidated into easy-to-use collaboration platforms. They help workers collaborate asynchronously, that is, not simultaneously with others, to check in and respond to message threads and document changes as their schedule allows. This is becoming almost essential as teams become more distributed across multiple time zones, as well as for busy workers juggling multiple teams and projects. And now synchronous or simultaneous with others. Tools are being added: video and audio conferencing, data sharing, instant messaging, presence detection, availability status, reputation, and knowledge capture. And collaborative technologies are reaching new levels of ease to use, fidelity and ubiquity as they combine synchronous and asynchronous tools, merge and consolidate to fewer, stronger providers and converge to standard platforms, for example Google and its suite of search, email, document sharing groups, etc. As the economy continues to improve and the competition gets tougher, you need every ounce of communication skill you can muster to land the career and business opportunities that will be coming your way. Last year, 73% of Fortune 500 companies were active on Twitter, while more than 80% of executives believed social media engagement led to increased sales. So what does 2016 hold for social media in the workplace? It looks like many of the big and sometimes overhyped promises that have surrounded social media, better insight into consumer behaviour, improved office productivity with internal networks, and of course significant measurable return on investment will finally begin to be realised. So far, social media has largely been limited to marketing and community building functions at companies. But a recent report from McKinsey showed that a majority of the estimated $1.3 trillion in untapped value from social technology lies in improved communications and collaboration within and across enterprises. In other words, social media is poised to become an office productivity tool much the same way that email did in the late 1990s. Social media has given companies access to unprecedented amounts of information on client behaviour and preferences, so-called big data, but making sense of it all and turning it into actionable policy has been elusive. Larger organisations, including Gatorade, Dell and the Red Cross, have led the way here, pioneering dedicated command centres for real-time monitoring and analysis. Social media mission control rooms are staffed by multiple employees, the centres outfitted with banks of screens tracking everything from tweets and likes to customer sentiment using a range of analytical software. While savvy companies may have unlocked the secrets of doing business on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn and Google+, a host of new networks has suddenly entered the picture. In 2013, Instagram saw a share of social media traffic grow by 17,319%, while Pinterest grew by 5,124%. At the same time, international social networking is entering a phase of dramatic growth. In 2013, new users were expected to grow by 21.1% in Asia Pacific, including China, India and Indonesia, 23.3% in the Middle East and 12.6% in Latin America. Last year alone, China's Twitter-like service nearly doubled its base to 400 million users, easily surpassing Twitter's 170 million active users. In 2012, Harvard Business Review surveyed 2,100 companies and found that 79% use or plan to communicate using social media, but a mere 12% of those firms felt they were using social media effectively. We should see this frustrating gap between social media hype and reality begin to close as new technologies take root. Companies institutionalize social practices and improved analytical tools show the real return on investment on social investments, and this in turn means we need to develop our own communication skills to use these tools. The searching for information, reading and responding to emails and collaborating with colleagues takes about 60% of typical knowledge workers' time. And how could they become up to more than 25% more productive through the use of social technologies? Some organisations are becoming a zero email company, aiming to boost employee productivity by replacing internal email with a collaborative social networking platform. Social technology is giving rise to new organisational models. Not only can social technology enable co-workers to collaborate easily across time and space, but it can also redefine the boundaries of the organisation and change them as needed. For example, using social platforms, companies can quickly reach into the social matrix and assemble teams of internal and external talent, hook up partners and customers, and complete projects more quickly and with greater expertise. They can then disband teams and reform others as needed, or deploy resources on multiple projects more easily. Companies can outsource problems to customers and use social media to drive engagement and innovation at the same time. Enterprises can be born global or micro multinational, bringing together capabilities from different parts of the world from their inception rather than growing into new geographies.
Fantastic. Thanks for that excellent content in that video, which I look forward to discussing with you a little bit later on. But let's have a look at poll 2 first. Now, we appreciate delegates' input on this one. How can a company use social networks to improve collaboration and communication within the organisation and with external stakeholders? Would you say it's A, Yammer to promote internal news and give the opportunity to pose questions, B, to raise the profile of the organisation and in consequence increase employee buy-in, C, to network across geographically dispersed areas, D, to instill the organisational values, or E, other? So what do you think? How can a company use social networks to improve collaboration and communication within the organisation and with external stakeholders? Is it A, Yammer or similar software to promote internal use and give the opportunity to pose questions, B, to raise the profile of the organisation and in consequence increase employee buy-in, C, to network across geographically dispersed areas, D, to instill the organisational values, or E, other? And I've just been looking at some of the comments from our delegates actually as the video is playing there. Interestingly enough, home working doesn't seem to be getting that much of a vote of confidence from some of our participants. Emma wrote in to say that she had 3 weeks enforced home working after her car got written off, and she didn't like it very much. Quite likes home working once in a while, but not as an extended thing, because you just miss the interaction with employees and colleagues. I think that seems to be coming across as a fairly consistent message. What do you think about that, Hilary?
No, I think that it is a cause for concern. I think it just broadens the divide between those of us who would opt for a home working situation because it might suit us in terms of our caring responsibilities or our distance for travel, versus those of us who join a company hoping to interact with our colleagues, and that's part of who we are within the organisation. So if that is taken away from us, then it becomes sometimes quite stressful to deal with in those circumstances.
Perhaps it's also got to do with choice as well. I noticed that Vicky Haddock made the point that her organisation recently made a large number of people home workers, and they all thought it was great at first, but then as time went on they weren't so keen. So possibly it's a case of, if you'd like, it's nice to have the option of working at home, particularly I often find it very useful if I've got a lot of writing to clear. But you do need to talk to other people, and sometimes it's kind of difficult to find them when you want them. Whereas, at work I tend to bump into folk in the corridors, and you do business like that.
Yeah, I think it can be quite isolating, yes.
Yeah. So just looking at the results of the poll now, interesting enough, the biggest sort of response to get a thumbs up from our delegates is to network across geographically dispersed areas, which got 38.4% of response. The next one is things like Yammer to promote internal news and give the opportunity to pose questions. That scored 23.3%. Closely behind that is raising the profile of the organisation and in consequence increasing the employee buy-in. That got the best part of 18%. And then 1 in 10 respondents felt to instill the organisational values was the best way of using social networks to improve collaboration and communication. So any surprises there for you, Hilary?
Well, I'm surprised at the amount we got at 38.4% to network across geographically dispersed areas, not because it's unimportant, it is extremely important, but I didn't realise that we'd almost reached a tipping point towards that, particularly with delegates. I mean, it does give us a tremendous opportunity to open up new marketplaces and become more international. And even if you just take, for example, China's sort of Twitter-like Siana Weibo, excuse my pronunciation, which is about 400 million users at the time I read about it in the McKinsey report. So it really is giving us access to people that we didn't have access to before. So it's a tremendous positive, for us to work towards in our sort of business communication.
Great. It's a fascinating statistic you cited there in the video too, that 73% of Fortune 500 companies are actually using social media. To tell you the truth, I'm surprised it's as little as that. That's only what? 1 in 4? Sorry, no, what shows you I'm a marketer. Let's say three quarters barely of companies are active on social media. Is that?
Well, I mean, that
have I misunderstood that statistic?
No, that is as it was published in a Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago. So it'd be really interested if those stats were actually updated. I mean, however, the key point to that is that people are jumping on the bandwagon to participate, but far fewer organisations think that they're using it effectively and positively, and I think that's got to be taken into consideration with things like compliance and legal constraints, and the fact that now companies are actually probably going to have to store all their social media communications just in case of litigation. So I think there is a worry that we're using it because everybody's trying to, but are we doing something very positive and effective with it? Yeah, I think that probably needs a little more work from all of us, really, to ensure that.
I think that's a very interesting point. It actually corresponds to something that somebody's just contributed on the attendee chat. I noticed somebody said, Melanie said that as our office environments are difficult places to focus on one activity for any length of time, home working has become the place where real thinking could be achieved. So perhaps the key to this is you work in certain sorts of configurations for certain sorts of tasks, and that way, and again, by exercising choice perhaps about where you can work at particular times, you'll get better quality, better morale, and a better effect overall.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true.
Okay. I noticed Dorota Pajeszek has just commented that her company uses a lot of offshoring, and this actually creates its own communication challenges, and in fact makes home working more difficult and more stressful. So again, perhaps it's not just in terms of individual work configurations, how the company chooses to organize itself, and things like offshoring or outsourcing can have an effect on the best kind of way of communicating, or the kind of challenges that are presented.
Yeah, and I think we've also got to take, the time lag that we have into account in terms of communication. So, if it has the positive that we can work asynchronously sometimes with people, but it has the negative that perhaps synchronous work is required when we're all on different time zones.
Lots of pajama working going on there.
Yeah, it does bring us back to working in pajamas, doesn't it?
Great. Okay, what I'd like to do now is to perhaps move to the next video, where we're going to be looking at what is a real problem actually in terms of the sorts of technologies we're talking about, which is the coming shortage of knowledge workers. Well, perhaps that's also an opportunity for some of our delegates. Anyway, please can we have the video now?
The force of automation that has been felt in production work, such as automotive assembly, and transaction work, such as dispensing cash in a bank or booking travel tickets, is now beginning to be felt in types of knowledge work that were not previously possible or practical to hand over to machines. This has enormous implications for augmenting the capabilities of so-called interaction workers, professionals, managers, and administrative support staff, who often represent the most expensive and high-impact employees in organisations. Knowledge work automation is made possible by advances in big data analytics, machine learning, and natural user interfaces. For example, the ability of a computer to interpret instructions in natural human language, combined with unprecedented computing power and connectivity. Knowledge work automation has the potential to affect more than 230 million knowledge workers around the world and nearly $9 trillion in employment costs. This presents huge opportunities as well as challenges to leaders across business, society and government and across multiple sectors of the economy. Knowledge workers in our data-driven economy often spend a huge amount of time and effort gathering and communicating data. Developments in natural language processing and contextual understanding are finally making machines able to search information and uncover patterns and relationships, all at superhuman speed and efficiency. Social media tools helps enterprises with wide networks track product reviews and consumer complaints on Facebook and Twitter. Impossible for humans with hundreds of thousands of relevant posts daily, but possible with automated algorithms that look for patterns and can distinguish between tones in pattern. Many jobs that have traditionally involved human understanding or other humans and communicating with them are now getting automated as machines become better at understanding language and processing speech. One automobile association uses computers to answer calls from motorists and dispatch roadside assistance, saving 60 to 80% in cost per call compared with outsourced call centres and cutting transaction in time by half. Translation apps integrated into smartphones and web browsers can instantly translate entire web pages and could soon allow tourists to speak the local language by talking into their apps. Advances in big data analytics and deep learning, programs that mimic how human brain discerns patterns amongst objects, sounds or other kinds of information, now make it possible for machines to process huge data sets and high volume data feeds in near real time and see patterns the human brain cannot. IBM's Watson computer achieved fame by beating human champions in the TV quiz program Jeopardy! Now IBM has teamed up with oncologists at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York to develop a decision support application for cancer diagnosis and treatment using Watson. The application has trained on 600,000 medical evidence reports and 1.5 million patient records and clinical trial reports and is continuously learning from the latest medical research and cases. Machines are now being employed as assistants to users, sometimes even before they know they need it. Apple's Siri digital assistant can take in voice queries and return search results, look up the weather, make calls, or even offer a choice of nearby restaurants. Google now attempts to second-guess the user based on behavior and context and preemptively provides information, flight details on reaching the airport, traffic conditions when leaving home in the morning, and even nearby photo shots. As these techniques are applied to more kinds of knowledge work, companies have the opportunity to automate many tasks, redesign jobs, and do things never before possible, even with the best human workforces. However, this will involve significant investment in technology, as well as a change in organisational culture. Business leaders will have to rethink the way they structure their organisations when some knowledge work tasks can be automated. The value at stake is considerable. Based on an analysis of how automated knowledge tools might be applied across several different types of tasks around the world, MGI estimates the annual impact of $5 to $7 trillion in 2025. While some kinds of knowledge work could be automated and some jobs could be eliminated, other positions could increase in value. There'll be greater need for workers who have a deep understanding of communicating using statistics and analytics. The right talent could command a higher premium. At the same time, leaders across business and society will have to tackle the implications for workers. Technological advances have historically displaced some jobs and created others. Eventually, governments and business will have to share the responsibility to ensure that preparedness by retraining workers and redesigning education. This could lead to a redefinition of the knowledge worker.
Thank you very much, Hilary. We're back now from the video segment into our third and final poll. So we'd be very interested in people's response to the next series of questions. So poll 3, what could be some risks created by automating services or tasks earlier performed by humans or under close human supervision? So can you just select what you think is your what you think is the main risk? A, communicating with customers. B, intercultural misunderstandings. C, ordering goods. D, customer satisfaction. Or E, other. So just to repeat that, what do you think is the main risk created by automating services or tasks earlier performed by humans or under close human supervision? Might it be A, communicating with customers, B, intercultural misunderstandings, C, ordering goods, D, customer satisfaction, or E, other? So while we're waiting for the results of that poll to come back, are you a user of Siri much, Hilary? Do you find that a useful service?
I do use it occasionally, but I sometimes find it extremely irritating. So, what about you, Terry?
I quite like talking to it, actually, the odd moments. I tell you, once I found it is occasionally a real lifesaver. Like if you're lost somewhere unfamiliar, as I often am, I ask it for directions, and it will kind of tell me where to walk. I did have to work out though that you have to specify whether you're walking or driving when you ask it for directions.
Yes, and sometimes it doesn't understand your accent. Yeah. You know, I've got quite a Scottish accent, so sometimes it takes you off on a complete tangent. It misinterprets some of the words that you've said.
I think possibly the nicest thing about it is how unfailingly polite it is. I like many of the people I talk to on a day-to-day basis.
Yes,
anyway.
That's very true.
Right, I see we've got the early results of the poll coming through, so thank you very much those of you that have participated. And leading the field is actually customer satisfaction, scoring 32%. So that's about a third of the vote goes to customer satisfaction being the main risk that automating services or tasks will create. Closely followed by intercultural misunderstandings at 26.7%. So any thoughts on that, Hilary?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's really true in terms of customer satisfaction because, for example, I think the AA or Automobile Association has done that a lot, automating their response and getting rescue out to people in a very much quicker time and more efficient. And that's great because we're in an emergency situation at that time. But I think, customer satisfaction is dropping when we are subjected to automated, customer service. And a lot of organizations now, particularly those who are aiming for the silver community, are actually having a guarantee that they will not automate these services because people are finding it very difficult to understand. However, that being said, I think it can be a positive. We can learn from it and we can perhaps redesign the way we use our communication tools to use this to take perhaps the drudgery element out of our work and perhaps hone in our knowledge workers where we need them most, because I think that's one of the key points to this, is that our work is changing, and we want to add value to what we're doing. And if we can retrain ourselves, to take on board these different communication tools, perhaps in the end, our jobs can be more rewarding, and we can use it not to de-skill, but to upskill.
Yeah. So it's interesting too about this business of customer satisfaction, because we tend to connect customer satisfaction with human contact, but very often human contact is a bit tiresome. I'm thinking of a project my wife was involved in, which was about automated response in healthcare, and this was for people who needed to have repeat prescriptions. And they trialed a computer-based system where you could phone up. Obviously, there was some kind of identification protocol to go through. But people found it a lot more convenient to phone into a computer to order the repeat prescription or whatever routine task it was, than to have to go through the palaver of even spend time greeting and saying goodbye to a human being on the other side of the phone.
And I think that brings in, sorry, I crossed over you there. I think that brings in the generation gap as well, because, younger people who are far more diligent with a computer interaction prefer sometimes to order and to use an ordering system or engage with an organisation where they don't have to speak to anybody, and they can actually just search for the information they want, and they want it there, and they want it available.
Yeah, and that's come out with the poll too. We only had 1.3% of respondents felt that ordering goods would be something that was placed at risk by automated systems. Mind you, I find that if I'm not very careful, I tend to buy 2 railway tickets rather than 1 when I'm buying railway tickets, because I'm a bit sort of bad at clicking the right box.
Well,
anyway.
yes, I have done that myself with plane tickets when it says booking hasn't gone through, only to find it has several times.
Oh dear. I've noticed, thanks very much, by the way, to participants for continuing their efforts with comments in the comment box. I noticed that John Appleby Fleming has made the very telling point that the comments from elsewhere about sound and lost connection reflect the problems with home working itself, which I think is a very good point, actually.
Yes, that is very, very true, isn't it? Yes.
The technology does need to work.
Yeah, when our only form of communication disappears on us, it makes our working day very difficult.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, actually, Gwyn there, has just said as well that I think young people find it alien to have to speak to someone on the phone to complete a transaction such as ordering. Yeah, I would completely agree with that.
That's a very interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great. Well, I hate to curtail this really interesting discussion, particularly the excellent points that are coming in from the attendee chat, but I think it really is time we had another video, and this one is Hilary talking now about the issues of communication with 3 billion more users, many of whom I think are logged into our webinar.
As incomes rise in developing nations, their citizens are becoming wired, connected by mobile computing devices, particularly smartphones, that will only increase in power and versatility. Although several emerging markets have experienced double-digit growth in internet adoption, enormous growth potential remains. India's digital penetration is only 10%, and China's is around 40%. Rising levels of connectivity will stimulate financial inclusion, local entrepreneurship, and enormous opportunities for communicating in business. As internet-enabled smartphones and other mobile devices move rapidly down the cost curve, they will enable vast new applications and sources of value. A harbinger of value comes to the success of mobile payment services across a number of developing economies. Dutch Bangla Bank Limited in Bangladesh, for example, garnered over 1 million mobile payment subscribers in 10 months. Standard Bank of South Africa reduced its origination costs for new customers by 80% by using mobile devices. Another source of value is local matching services that connect supply with demand. Kenya's Google-backed iHub project uses technology services to identify and finance entrepreneurs. Technology also helps multinationals adapt products and business models to local conditions. In India, Unilever provides mobile devices to rural distributors, including traditional mom-and-pop stores. The devices relay information such as stock levels and pricing back to the company, so Unilever can improve its demand forecasts, inventory management and marketing strategy, raising rural sales in stores by a third.
Thank you very much, Hilary, for that final segment. Fascinating, that particularly the points you were making about the way that companies that perhaps we often think of as enormous kind of monolithic enterprises which aren't at all interested in the fates of small businesses or developing economies are actually helping to facilitate precisely those developing economies through the kind of services that they're innovating. I was particularly taken by some of those things that you were saying about, for example, work that's being done by Google in various parts of the world.
That's true, and I think a lot of it does give some insight onto bottom of the pyramid and, our drive now towards social inclusion and sustainable business, that we are becoming far more inclusive on this. And also, we're able to make a point about intercultural communications as well and actually include far more people within this.
Just looking at some of the comments coming in on the attendee chat, Dorota has made another very good point about, I'm sure this sounds like an extremely familiar experience actually. She's saying that she's worried that we're isolating ourselves more and more using automated systems and technology rather than connecting. Particularly, when you're on a train and you look around, everybody else is either on a phone or a laptop and nobody's actually talking to anybody in real life anymore.
I think that's very, very true, actually. Yeah. Unless something happens. I was on a recent train journey where, for some reason, people suddenly couldn't use these devices. Something had crashed, and it was the one occasion where I think I've struck up a conversation with 4 or 5 people discussing something. Somebody had pulled the communication cord in error or something, so it did. It actually did allow for communication with
talk about, doesn't it?
It did, because we were in a blind spot for internet at the same time.
Right, I see. Excellent. Okay, what I'd like to do now is just move on to our final slide, because I've got a few things to say about things that are coming up relevant to communications. So just moving to that, yeah. So thank you very much, first of all, to everybody for joining us. As ever, these slides and the webinar itself are being recorded and will be available at a link which will be mailed to participants in due course. So do watch out for that. And as I say, if there are people that might like to have seen this or participated in this event but weren't able to, please invite them to do so, because I think there's a lot of really, really good content in those videos. And I hope you agree that the discussions have been quite interesting as well. Some fascinating points being made by our participants. I'd also like to tell you about the free learning that the Open University is putting out there. We've got our Open Learn site. There's the URL is there for you. Lots of interesting stuff there, particularly some new offerings which we call Box, looking at basic employability skills, and samples of course material that you can have a look at. We've also got our Business Perspectives blog, which is always full of interesting opinion and comment. But the thing I'm most at pains to tell you about, because I am, after all, the MOOCs Programme Director from the Faculty of Business and Law, and indeed Hilary has been working very hard on this too, is that we have a number of MOOCs, massive online open courses, coming up soon on the innovative FutureLearn platform. And we've got a series of what are known as Business Fundamentals MOOCs, where there are a series of them looking at key business functions, communications, networking, customer engagement, and project management. And the one that's leading that suite is the one on communications. So we're really looking forward to that, and we hope that you'll find that on FutureLearn later on this summer and register for it free of charge. So thank you very much again, everybody. Thank you in particular, Hilary, for the fantastic work that you put into this webinar. Excellent content. And,
well, thanks very much to the delegates for persevering with our sound problems.
Yeah, thanks very much for everybody's patience, but also thanks for their fantastic contributions too. So look forward to joining you again at some stage, and goodbye for now.
Yes, bye.